Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Podcast Strikes Back. My name is George and you're listening to our review of Godzilla, King of the Monsters with the boys Connor
Hello.
and Benny.
Hi there.
Well, here we are for the sequel to 2014's Godzilla, the third film in Legendary's Monsterverse, and also the 35th film in the Godzilla franchise. Can you believe that? Godzilla, King of the Monsters, we've seen it. And before we get into the non-spoiler part of the review, let's have a little catch-up on everyone's feelings towards this franchise and also some of the trailers for King of the Monsters. Benny, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I was in a very skeptical place about this movie based on how I felt about the 2014 version. I don't know. I was kind of excited for that one, I think. The trailers were pretty cool. Kind of got me into the mood for it. And then I was thoroughly bored by that movie when I saw it.
As most were, I believe.
Yeah, the reviews were pretty decent though. In the end, so much so that I thought I had to revisit it. So this past day, I watched that and another Godzilla film that I'll talk about in a minute. But I was really, it took a lot of willpower to actually go back and watch that movie because I just did not want to really.
Yeah,
but just going into a sequel, 5 years down the line, I'm like, I want to watch the original again. And my feelings are more or less the same. I don't think it's awful. I think it's a pretty solid first half. And then it just like a back half that is so boring, like shockingly boring, given that that's where most of the action is. I don't find any of the human drama particularly interesting, but just the premise, this world with these Titans rising and stuff is kind of interesting, and all of that, just the plot becomes so by the numbers for the back half of it that it's not even interesting. The Godzilla stuff is just whatever, big action stuff. I also watched 2016's Shin Godzilla, which was one I'd heard a lot about. It's essentially a Godzilla reboot from the directed by the creator of Neon Genesis Evangelion.
Oh yeah, Hideki Anno.
Yeah, and that was awesome. I highly recommend this one.
He directed that?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. And he really was the right choice. It's such an interesting movie. It takes a real back to basics approach to Godzilla, whereby he is just a monster, just a horrible monster, and a really grotesque and gruesome one. I'm really surprised Toho allowed him to turn this kind of beloved icon at this point, who is usually the defender of Earth and stuff. And just turn it into a honestly really disgusting monster. So that was a really, really fun movie. It's mostly like a political satire. There's not actually that much Godzilla in it, but a really, really cool movie that I enjoyed a lot. And
You piqued my interest with that, man.
yeah, let's talk about that one. Yeah. But the combination of watching both of those with mixed results, either way, I'm in a bit of a Godzilla mood. So today I was just kind of like, yeah, fuck, let's do this. I want to watch all these monsters. Yeah.
That's a good Godzilla impression.
That was spot on, actually. He's here.
Should we?
What about you, Connor?
Yeah, fairly similar. I was very mediocre on the 2014 Godzilla. Thought that it had some good setup, some good premises, and then just did nothing with them. The human element to it, which is kind of where people latch on to a story. You go to see monsters fight, but you stay because there's some kind of drama or some kind of conflict, kind of with people that you can associate with. It just wasn't. It wasn't there. It was just. It was. We were literally just following Aaron Taylor Johnson as a reference point, but for no other reason.
He may as well have been the cameraman for the movie.
Seriously, yeah. And so that I was very kind of lackluster on that. I thought that because it is relevant, Kong, which was the next in this world or franchise, I suppose.
Skull Island.
Skull Island. I thought that was visually pretty cool. Had some very interesting elements to it. Really loved John C. Reilly in it. But that, again, the human element of it really let it down when it came down to the main characters. I thought Tom Middleton and Brie Larson were god-awful in that film.
I love Tom Middleton.
Tom, what did I say?
You said Middleton.
Did I?
Yeah.
That's just move on. I can't do names anyway, so I don't know why you're surprised. I thought that they were both really shockingly bad in this, and it was just very distracting. But that movie had some really cool visuals and some like cool vibes to it. So I thought that if this movie could learn from the mistakes of those, if it could give us a solid human cast and maintain the kind of action that I wanted to see in terms of monsters fighting each other, I was really willing to give this movie a fighting chance. And I have absolutely loved the trailers up until now. I think the marketing material
you love those.
spot on. Yeah, I don't know what it is, but it was something about just seeing this, like the music, the visuals combined were just top notch for me.
Yeah, the spectacle of the trailers was extremely strong and tantalizing. But I think I fell asleep about 10 minutes into the 2014 Godzilla. So I haven't even seen it. I can't even claim to have seen it. Yeah. So I'm coming at this from, a very strange reference point. When I was a kid, I loved the 1997 Godzilla, as most of us did. But really, that's my only association with the Godzilla franchise. It's not something that I've delved into. But hearing Hideko Anno from Evangelion was on the Shin Godzilla, I'm going to watch that this weekend. That
Check it
sounds
out.
Quick
dope.
question for you, Ben, because you've already answered it. Have you watched any other Godzilla films, like the old, like 70s or 80s ones? Or
Dude, 54,
50s?
1950. This is a 65-year-old franchise. Isn't that insane? I've watched the original when I was much younger, and then the 98 one, the Roland Emmerich film, 2014, Shin Godzilla, just yesterday, and I think the first Netflix animated one from last year or the year before.
Yeah, because I remember being relatively young and going through a phase of watching all those old, like Godzilla versus Mothra. There's a couple of them. And I used to have the Mechzilla. Like I used to have it, like it was one of the only toys that I had of like,
action
figures.
Yeah.
It was like I think it's called Mechzilla or something. Mechagodzilla, yeah. I used to love that fucking thing. That was the coolest.
No doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt.
But yeah, what I remember of that was just really shoddy acting, but lots of fun nonetheless.
Yeah. So I guess with me and Godzilla, I don't really care about the human characters. I want that spectacle. I want that action. I just want something compelling that takes me through it, and that's kind of what I was expecting from the trailers. So let's get into the non-spoiler part of the review. What were the main takeaways for you guys in terms of the positive side of things here?
The biggest criticism about the 2014 version was the lack of Godzilla in Godzilla.
Totally.
There was 8 minutes, I think, of Godzilla in that movie. And it was really, watching it again today, it was just really almost laughable, remembering that there was so many instances where Godzilla rocks up in the scene and roars and they cut away. I'm like, oh, no wonder people were a bit pissed at this.
Right. I remember because
everyone was pissed off about it.
It was only at the very end that you actually got to see Godzilla, and I think I remember like getting why they did that. I was like, I get it. Like you're saving the big reveal of Godzilla for the end.
No, they show him in all of his full glory several times, and then cut straight to like Aaron Taylor Johnson somewhere else. It's
5 minutes
is
later.
that it?
Oh, dude,
I haven't watched that film.
They were saving special effects, which is great. But this movie certainly delivered a lot more on that front than the last one.
Yeah.
A lot of Godzilla action, a lot of other Titans.
Lots of variety with the Titans and strong design, I would say. Not all of it, but for the most part, I really like the design of most of the creatures.
Yeah, and I would say fantastic execution in terms of the visual effects as well.
Yeah, there was a few dodgy parts, but overall, I actually think the strongest part of this film for me is not only that, but the cinematography, not necessarily just the CG, but the lighting, the color grading, the camera work, the in-camera stuff is just fantastic. I think this film looks really polished in terms of the visual side of things.
Yeah. Great. Look, there's some spots where the green screen is a bit, is very iffy. But on a whole, I think that the visual design of this film is spot on. I think that was like an A+. And the trailer promised that, really. That's what I think a lot of people will have been sold on to go see this film.
I don't think I've seen that Michael Bay like teal and orange color grade that this had prevalently through it in a long time. Like that was a huge thing. And you see in a lot of Disney posters as well these days, the Aladdin poster, the Force Awakens poster. It's a great color combo. But it was. I really liked that. I was just kind of like, this looks beautiful. So shout out to Lawrence Sher, who's the cinematographer on this. I think he was the MVP of this film.
Yeah, just a lot of really beautifully kind of composed shots, especially of the really large scale stuff. A lot of nice just color kind of bouncing off each other.
And we've been watching. We talked about this on the our weekly show. There's this YouTube channel that's doing critiques of computer graphics.
Yeah. Corridor Crew.
Thanks for that save.
I gotcha.
What they sort of analyze scenes from different movies and critique the CG work. And they critiqued the original Jurassic Park, and one of the strengths they said was they kept it dark, they kept it rainy. It wasn't daylight, and like they were trying to.
It adds complexity.
Yeah, and this film, I think they lent into that, and everything. There's quite a lot of darkness. There's a lot of clouds. There's a lot of rain, and it sort of obscures things, and it really helps make the Titans work well and feel real.
They obviously save for the big shots where like there's close-ups of the monsters and that. And I think that they did a really good job of picking and choosing where they decide to, kind of do close-ups and where they decide to pull back, and you got to see more of a spectacle. And I think that I think that was executed really well.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I will say on top of visuals, I'd say just the overall usage of monster fights. Like I think that's really what a lot of people will have come to this movie for. And I think that this movie delivers in spades in terms of that. It's not too much. It's not enough. I think it's kind of spot on for me in terms of how much I wanted to see of monsters fighting.
Yeah, I think they did a good job as well with the set pieces. Like there's always like the humans and then the monsters, and they're sort of going back and forth and they're converging. I thought they did a good job of making the humans feel somewhat relevant. Yeah.
And they paced it out better than the previous film, definitely, there are several massive fights in this movie that are spread throughout the kind of running time, not just the, monsters moving towards each other for an entire film and they meet up at the end.
Exactly. I think that's a huge strength of this film.
Yeah, the pacing of this film, it doesn't, I don't know about you guys, but for me, I never really felt bored by this film. I never was kind of like, oh, fucking get on with it. Like, I think that they did a really good job of, I don't think that very much of this movie was wasted. It's a fairly long film, but I feel like everything was done to set something else up, to, spend some time on a visually spectacular scene. Nothing felt unnecessary in that film. At least that I can think of.
In terms of pacing of the fight sequences, I think they were really well paced. As the main sort of pillars of this film.
Yeah.
But I think towards the end, I was kind of like, let's go. Like, I'm kind of ready for this to kind of wrap up.
Yeah.
And at 132 minutes, I think this could have shaved off 10 minutes and maybe been
20.
a little snappier. Where were you sitting with the pacing?
It was longer than it needed to be. Nothing in terms of the human drama of this film was that compelling that we needed this much of it, I feel.
It was certainly better than 2014. Which is not saying much.
Let's just put this to bed. I think this movie is so much better than that movie in every aspect.
Yeah.
And I don't think that movie's even terrible. But well,
why don't we talk about the human drama and what we thought of it? Because I mean, comparatively, yes, really good. On its own, do you guys think that it stands?
I think there's some really, really interesting plot threads in this film.
Yes. Yeah.
And I just don't think they pushed it far enough. I think they could have made certain characters more unhinged. They could have made certain characters more emotionally sort of chaotic, if that's the right term. But yeah, I just don't think they pushed it far enough. And I didn't buy into a lot of the things that were going on. But for the service of the plot, those bullet points worked in inverted commas, but I wanted more.
Some of it felt a little bit flat, like,
thinly veiled.
Yeah. I'd agree with that.
I feel like they made specifically really just one kind of very interesting choice with the character almost right at the beginning.
I was impressed that they decided to pull that trigger
and it was
sooner rather than later. Which
it was
I really
the kind of thing
enjoyed.
that if they had done later, I would have scoffed at completely. But the fact that it permeates the whole film, I quite like. But the rest of it was all pretty rote, just kind of standard disaster movie stuff.
There was something that happened in this film that was so typical disaster movie, and you can pretty much swear by it. In any disaster movie, this trope will happen, and
It's better than
bugs
the
me
one in the first one. Carry on.
every time. Yeah, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's in the trailers.
Just about.
It's a mass scale disaster destroying a city, and there's like a soldier rescuing a child.
Oh no, that's not
No?
what I was thinking about. It
Okay.
was
Oh, that
literally
bit.
yeah. We'll talk about that bit probably in spoilers.
Oh
but
my God.
no, I was talking about you will always find the ground collapsing, behind the
Protagonist,
The protagonist
and
as
stopping
they
right
run
where
away.
they fall.
yeah, and it's just like that bothers me so much, and I don't know why. I think, to be honest, what it is 2012 really scarred me because they did that like 3 times. They did
It's on you for watching that movie.
Yeah, it's a fair call. I can't argue that, but that movie was so egregious in the way that they used that trope like 3 times in a row that I was just like, nah, this is unacceptable. I never want to see this again.
John Cusack as Jesus. You
Pretty
like my John
much.
Cusack attire
Yeah,
today?
you're really
Cosplay.
pulling it. Yeah.
I thought, I don't know. I don't really. I don't know if there are any more positives. In
Yeah,
there
I
for
got a
me.
massive one.
Oh yeah.
Something that I really loved. The only thing probably I really loved about watching the 2014 film today was the score by Alexandre Desplat. And I thought this one was even better. I really love Bear McCreary's score on this. And he's someone who I generally always love his stuff. He does a lot of TV work. But yeah, just in the kind of blockbuster sphere, I thought this really kind of stood out.
Yeah.
And in a couple of ways. One was all the original compositions, which I was really enjoying. And the other was the classic Godzilla themes that were threaded throughout it, which I just so iconic. I feel
A lot of Japanese influence on the music, which I thought was really cool. There's not an awful lot of soundtracks that after I've finished watching a movie, immediately go and look up the soundtrack and try and find certain songs. There's a particular sequence in this where I thought that, the music really stood out and really improved on a scene. I was just like, oh, fuck, yes. Like, I made that mental note to be like, I'm going to find what this song is, and I'm probably going to play it on repeat until I can't stand it. But yeah, I totally 100% agree. I think that the score was a real positive in this.
Yeah, I definitely thought it was strong. I guess I don't have that context of knowing the themes because this is essentially the second Godzilla film I've properly watched. So, but I will agree with you that it did seem more sophisticated and had a few interesting ingredients in there as opposed to your typical when compared to your typical Hollywood feature score.
Definitely.
Particularly
And it
for
was-
like a disaster film.
Yeah, and it was quite varied as well. I just really wanted to shout that out because there are just so few blockbusters that have kind of even interesting scores, let alone really good ones.
I think that one other thing I will say is that while they didn't take some characters, let's say, seriously, or they didn't really develop them too much, I think that there are 1 or 2 characters in this that they really did a good job with and actually gave some emotional weight to. I think that the only character that people felt any emotional weight for in the 2014 film was Bryan Cranston, who they killed off within 20 minutes of the beginning of the film.
Yes.
Which was egregious for so many reasons. Mostly because I think half the people went there to see Bryan Cranston
Definitely.
in this film.
Right at the peak of the Breaking
Yeah,
Bad boom.
Exactly.
And then they were like, nah, psych. Which, when it
Psych,
happened,
psych, psych.
part of me
Psych.
was like, mad respect for them for like killing off the main draw card like so soon. I was like, that takes balls. But at the same time, I was like, also fuck you for doing that.
Yeah, I'll say that went over a lot easier in 2019 watching that.
Yeah, no doubt.
Oh yeah, it
No
would.
doubt.
Yeah.
Because, this was just that moment where everyone was like, oh, it's Walter White versus Godzilla.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not what this is.
Yeah, so you're not going to Godzilla for that Tarantino dialogue and conversation.
Yeah.
You're going there for fuck off monsters, battling it out, leveling cities. But I gotta say, the dialogue in this was god awful. Like the script was just so piss weak. I've heard these lines. There's about 5 or 6 lines in here where I've been like, are you kidding me? This is like an 18-year-old writing their first script ever.
Some of it was very much like temp dialogue. Like you
Oh,
put it
man.
like, damn right. I'm like, yeah, no one needed to say that. It's
Yeah,
fine.
that was like, unnecessary.
Honestly, it was so cringeworthy, and I'm surprised at the level of some of this film being so sophisticated that like to put out that quality of dialogue seemed really imbalanced.
Some very, very kind of rote dialogue, unless it was delivered by Bradley Whitfield, in which case it was brilliant. I don't care what he says.
Was he the funny guy?
Yeah,
Funny guy, yeah.
The so-called funny guy.
funny guy.
Yeah, he was a welcome presence in this. I was counting in the 2014 film today. There is not a single joke or laugh in that film.
Oh, really?
Which really makes it stand out, I feel, in this kind of post-Marvel-y, jokey, quippy blockbuster movies. But yeah, this one tried a little harder in that regard.
Yeah, and I think that there's certainly some lines that felt as though they landed. Others didn't, but I appreciated them for trying.
Yeah, he was enjoyable. He was. I tell you what, though, the whole time I was looking at him, I'm like, you are Joe Russo in 20 years. Like, seriously. Did you guys
20
get that?
years. They can't be that different in age.
Yeah.
That's not
59
where I first
versus,
went, but
they're about 10 years difference. But, Joe Russo's looking good, man.
Yeah, he's
looking
going to age
good.
better.
Yeah, so that for me, like, oh God, it was insufferable, some of the dialogue in this, I found.
That's fair. But while we're talking about the cast, I will say that Vera Farmiga and Kyle Chandler, two of the main characters in this film, something about them, I always find them two of the most credible actors in Hollywood. I don't know what it is.
it's weird, isn't it? They
feel
just seem like
real
they
people.
should be. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Vera Farmiga in particular, I feel.
100%, yeah. And so, I don't know, I just find them, maybe the dialogue works a little better with them than it would with someone who just works a little less.
Yeah, I don't think it was really them that I felt wasn't quite that it didn't really land with. It was some of the more kind of supporting cast that I felt like just and it wasn't all the dialogue. It wasn't like a person that couldn't hit their lines. It was just very clearly they had been given lines that just I don't know how you'd make them sound good.
Bog standard.
Yeah. I will say one other thing that
Can I just say one thing real quick before that? This is the first time I've actually known that his name is Kyle Chandler. Honestly, I've seen that guy so much.
He's one of those
I'm always
guys.
like, who the fuck are you?
he's one of those faces, right?
Who are you? Tell me. I'm not going to look it up. Sorry to interrupt you there.
No,
man.
that's all good, man. One thing I will say, and this is such a weird thing to have in a big monster movie, as a negative, but I found that the consistencies within this film, like the continuities and the internal logic of this film, didn't quite hold up for me. Like there was just some very weird stuff that happened. I'm like, come on, guys, it's not necessary.
It's got a globe-trotting kind of vibe, and before they've actually sort of answered the logic of it, they've already swiftly moved on to the next thing.
I mean, it's not so much that, I suppose. I think it's like, for example, they in one scene would be, thousands of feet below the sea, and then the next scene, Godzilla's like standing up to his ankles.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, just wait, what?
Bro,
Like, it's very simple shit to just not fuck up.
didn't you get
He
the
was
memo?
paddling.
He
was
can
paddling.
tread water,
That's
man.
literally, when he started coming up, I'm like, what are the chances they're
just
going to
look
have
below
him
and his
just
legs
like,
like,
doing swimmer's kick down there? And
Why
then
do you think he's got those giant thighs?
Yeah,
They're
it's 'cause
boys.
he's really under the water like a duck.
Yeah. No, he's been
Um,
working out, man. Don't skip leg day.
But it was like that. It was we talked about that scene in the trailer where that kid is being pulled along and just shit like that where like explosions happen really close and barely the hair on a character moves to show that there's some kind of impact wave. And I'm kind of looking at this going like, I mean, I know I get it's a monster movie. You can't be, jumping too much into the nitty gritty of it, but like at least put in a little
So
bit of
more the
effort.
physics and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like just the consistencies and the continuity. Like, Godzilla standing up in the ocean is not a bad thing. Like he's big, but don't have people thousands of leagues under the sea just before that.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you mean. But you kind of like at least that's what I do. I go,
Yeah, that kind of stuff occurs to me, and I just brush it aside. It doesn't actually bother me. It is one of those situations where it would be nice probably if they paid a little more attention to just kind of real life physics or anything like that, but not a deal breaker.
No.
I really enjoyed the mythology of this film. It had
Yes.
a lot more. It delved into it a lot more than the last film did. Like it was just throwing everything at the wall.
But I didn't think it felt like it was too. There was a lot of exposition in here, but I don't think it was like force fed to you in a way that this is exactly what happened. They were kind
Yeah.
of figuring things out, and there was no kind of like, this is exactly the plot and what happened with the history. They were kind of inferring things, and
And it was-
I like that.
It was cool mythology as well. Like, I mean, just you wanted to learn more about it. Like, fuck, tell me more about that. And there's only a couple of scenes that I thought that the exposition was a bit ridiculous, and I will talk about that in spoilers because there's one in particular that I was like, oh, so egregious. But yeah, we'll get to
I think
that.
I know what you're talking about there. Any other positives? Any other negatives?
Ken
Watanabe.
Thank you. Ken Watanabe, I thought was really good in this. He was one of the only parts of the last one that I actually enjoyed in terms of, but he didn't have much to do.
Nothing. Just he spent that entire film just standing around with his mouth agape. It was horrible.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He had- he
Yeah,
had
I seem to
nothing.
have like weird like rose tinted glasses when it comes to that film. Like I seem to remember things being better than they were, and the other
It's very
things.
competent. It's just
Yeah.
so boring.
He got a
But-
lot more to do in this. He
Oh,
got a
so
lot
much more,
more
yeah.
lines. Like if you compare this role to Detective Pikachu, like he got a little bit of substance, a little bit of meat.
Weird comparison.
Well, he's Ken Watanabe often turns up in a film, and they don't. He's kind of like, hey, it's Ken Watanabe, but it was nice to see in this. Like he got a little bit more than
Yeah.
he normally gets.
There were even some really good callbacks to the first film that were very subtle. They didn't bother rehashing any plot points or anything. That was just there. That if you were someone like me who has just watched the last one, because if it was been more than 2 weeks, you won't remember it. You can be like,
Yeah.
Yep. I literally, I don't have much else to say.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a big monster movie. And if you go in there wanting to see big monsters fight each other, against, really cool backdrops with some very cool music on it, you're not going to be disappointed by this film.
Yeah, I will totally agree with that. I feel like I'm forgetting this movie by the second. There's nothing in here that's terrible. The stuff that you want to see in a Godzilla film, it executes well. There's just a little bit of fat on here that could have been trimmed, make it a little bit tighter. Would have liked a little bit to push the emotional resonance of some of the characters a bit more. But overall, this is a pretty damn competent Godzilla film, and I'll never watch this film again, guaranteed. But solid, very, very solid.
The only way I would watch this film again is if I could see it in a bigger cinema.
yes.
Yeah.
Because I think that would be cool. And I mean,
Yeah,
as a
IMAX
recommendation,
or
if
VMAX.
someone if anyone listening to this is planning on seeing it and you haven't already seen it, watch it in the theater. If you're going to watch it once, watch it in the theater. Watch it on as big a screen as you can find, because that's probably where you're going to get the absolute most out of this film.
I agree.
Yeah, completely. I don't even know what to say. I enjoyed a lot of this movie. I don't think it's amazing. I think it is better than the first one in every way. But again, if you want to watch a really good Godzilla movie, just go onto Anime Lab for free and watch Shin Godzilla. I think Godzilla as a property is so defined by its Japanese nature that real Godzilla movies are always just the Japanese ones. And these ones are always kind of
Spin-offs.
struggling to find their proper
did-
identity.
I mean, they recognized more of the Japanese origins in this one than they did in the 97 or 98?
Oh, yeah.
Like, I mean, that one was so...
Every movie ever made is more Japanese than Godzilla.
Yeah.
98.
It's more French.
Yeah, but I think that they at least did a good job of recognizing that this is a Japanese property and trying to bring in, like, even with the music, I thought that they did a really good job of bringing in a lot of kind of instrumental and kind of Japanese indicative themes.
Yeah, this is only the third Godzilla film to be completely produced by a Hollywood studio out of 35. So there you go.
So I would think that if you like the first one, you like this one a lot more, because I certainly did.
Yeah.
That being said, it's being received much more poorly than the last film.
I haven't seen any reviews for this.
Yeah, so for what it's
Wow.
worth, it's on 44% on Rotten Tomatoes. The last one was around 75.
What?
I would flip those completely.
44% is pretty rough on this one.
Yeah, I would say so.
incredibly
So
rough.
I don't know how like kind of monster movie enthusiasts are taking it. That's a very different sect.
Yeah.
A smaller part of the larger kind of consensus maybe. But yeah, I thought for a monster movie this was solid.
This is not a thumbs down in
No,
terms of this
certainly
is
not.
a 6 out of 10, a 7 out of 10.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
This is in the positive side of things.
This
for
is
sure.
something that you'll have a good time with. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
don't go in expecting, like you said, Tarantino or Nolan or anything like that. But it is a fun
It hits
time.
the brief.
Yeah.